Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Hezbollah, one of the most powerful non-state militaries in the world, has been assassinated in Beirut by Israel. In a wave of deadly and devastating airstrikes, Tel Aviv brought down at least 6 building towers in the Dahia neighborhood of the southern part of Beirut. Hezbollah had its command headquarters in Dahia, but according to the local people in Beirut, this neighborhood was also densely populated by civilians. The Israeli airstrikes happened without any warning to the civilians. According to military and security analyst Elijah Magnier, a whopping 85 tons of explosives was dropped by Israel in a span of a minute in just this one attack to target the chief of Hezbollah. So what are the implications of the killing of Hassan Nasrallah? Has the state of Israel accomplished its military goals in Lebanon, and will it now stop its aerial bombardment of Lebanon? Or will this attack now lead to a bigger escalation of the war in the Middle East? This is the moment when Israel used its fighter jets to unleash wave after wave of airstrikes on the Dahia neighborhood in southern Beirut. A series of powerful explosions caused by heavy bunker-busting bombs brought down at least 6 residential towers. The carnage was catastrophic. This black and white video, released by the IDF, shows the series of explosions as captured by the Israeli fighter jets. According to the local population in Beirut, the tremors created by the Israeli bombings felt almost like a minor earthquake. But what kind of bombs were dropped by the Israeli fighter jets? According to military analysts, Israel resorted to the use of the GBU-31 JDAM developed by the United States and the Spice 2000 bomb developed by the Israeli manufacturer Rafael in this attack. The death toll in this horrific attack is still not clear. Israel immediately claimed that it had killed the Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah, and the Israeli military's chief of staff Herzi Halevi claimed that there are more tools that Israel had in its toolbox that it can deploy in the coming days.
Eventually, after a long period of preparing many capabilities for Lebanon, we began to carry out our plans. Even this attack was prepared for a long time and was executed at the right time in a very precise manner. And we are now moving on to prepare the next things in a very precise way. To sum it up, I emphasize once again, we need top readiness in all our sectors, all the forces, including joining the other organizations. We should have very good coordination, very good preparedness.
The instructions for the deadly attack reportedly came from Netanyahu himself. The Israeli Prime Minister's office put out this photograph of Netanyahu of the moment when he green signaled these deadly strikes. On the ground in Beirut, the ambulances peeled as they rushed to the bombed site in Dahia, and the survivors were pulled out from the rubble and rushed to the hospitals. Hezbollah confirmed the death of Hassan Nasrallah on Saturday in a statement read out on Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV.
To the honorable Mujahideen and the forgiven and victorious heroes of the Islamic resistance, you are trusted by the martyred Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and you and your brothers were his impregnable shield and the jewel in the crown of heroism and sacrifice. Our leader is still among us with his thoughts, spirit, plan and sacred approach, and you are committed to the pledge of loyalty and commitment to resistance and sacrifice until victory. I offer my condolences.
In a statement put out by the Iranian leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Ayatollah said that the resistance against the Israeli occupation will continue. But the killing of Hassan Nasrallah did not mean that the Israeli airstrikes over Lebanon came to an end. There were more airstrikes that followed through the night and even through the next day. Hezbollah responded with some rocket fire of its own. West Asia now stands at a precipice. The American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has said that a full-scale war in Lebanon would be as deadly, if not worse, than the carnage that has been effected in the Gaza Strip. Calls for a ceasefire at the United Nations have fallen on deaf ears. The United States, even while it claims that it is working tirelessly for a ceasefire, has approved another $8.7 billion of weapons to the State of Israel. And no one is quite sure as to when this bloodletting in the Middle East will come to an end. China has the world's biggest navy. With more than 370 warships, Beijing, in its furious campaign of building warships in just the span of the last decade, has managed to eclipse the American naval fleet, which at the moment has 293 warships. But in terms of tonnage, the combined fleet of the Chinese Navy is a little over 2 million tons, while the United States is way ahead with its combined naval fleet weighing a staggering 4.2 million tons. But here's the catch. Going by the current trends, the Chinese Navy by the year 2030 will more than double itself in terms of tonnage and will even outpace the American naval vessels in just the span of the next 6 years. So one would think that things are looking very rosy for the Chinese naval power in the deep seas. But actually, they're not. So what really is going wrong with China's naval ambitions, even though China is the world's top shipbuilding nation in terms of tonnage? This is a satellite image that China has been trying to hide from the rest of the world. Captured between May and June, what you're looking at is China's latest nuclear-powered Zhao-class submarine that was under construction at the Wuchang shipyard near the city of Wuhan. Characterized by its X-shaped stern design to improve underwater maneuverability, the submarine reportedly sank when it was next to the pier. Beijing has remained completely tight-lipped about the incident. What is also not known is whether there were any casualties or whether the submarine was loaded with nuclear fuel at the time the submarine sank. Taiwan, which Beijing considers to be its breakaway renegade territory, claims that its intelligence was aware of the sinking of the Chinese submarine.
While we have followed media reports related to the Chinese submarine, we have also carried out some of our own investigations. We have a grasp of the situation through multiple intelligence and surveillance methods.
The sinking of the Zhao-class nuclear-powered attack submarine is a major embarrassment for China's naval ambitions. At the moment, China has 6 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, 6 nuclear-powered attack submarines, and 48 diesel-powered attack submarines. This makes a total of 60 submarines at the Chinese Navy's disposal. But Beijing, by the year 2025, intends to increase its submarine fleet to 65 vessels and to over 80 submarines by the year 2035. In comparison, the entire American submarine fleet is nuclear-powered, with 53 fast-attack submarines, 14 ballistic missile submarines, and 4 guided missile submarines, making a grand total of 71 submarines which the US Navy can field for reconnaissance, deterrence, and attack. The Chinese Navy at the moment is growing at a breakneck speed. But unless China can address the issues of corruption and quality that have surfaced with the sinking of its top-notch latest nuclear-powered attack submarine, the Chinese Navy will have a long gap to close before it can seek parity with the United States. Since the end of the Second World War, nuclear-armed states have engaged in a policy of deterrence which essentially adheres to the idea that if warring states were to launch major nuclear strikes, it would lead to mutually assured destruction. Defying this very policy, the Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday threatened that Russia could use nuclear weapons if it is attacked by any state, further adding that any conventional attack on Russia supported by a nuclear power would be tantamount to a joint attack. Elaborating further, he reiterated that proposals to this effect have been made to change Russia's nuclear doctrine. In the past, when Vladimir Putin had threatened the use of nuclear weapons, Ukraine had criticized it as nuclear saber-rattling employed to deter its allies from providing more support. So why has Vladimir Putin called for a change to Russia's nuclear doctrine at this critical juncture in the Russia-Ukraine war. Is Vladimir Putin bluffing, or is the West at the risk of making a grave miscalculation in its assessment of Russia's nuclear threshold? Our next report gets you the details.
Russia's nuclear doctrine is the document which sets out the conditions under which Moscow would use nuclear weapons. Defining the basic principle of the use of nuclear weapons, it states that the use of nuclear forces is an extreme measure for the defense of the country's sovereignty. On Wednesday, in a meeting of Russia's Security Council attended by top officials, Russian President Vladimir Putin underscored one of the proposed key changes.
On today's agenda, we have an issue related to updating the foundations of state policy in the field of nuclear deterrence. Along with the military doctrine, this is the document that officially defines and details Russia's nuclear strategy. The updated version of the document proposes that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear weapon state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear weapon state, should be regarded as a joint attack on the Russian Federation. The conditions for Russia's transition to the use of nuclear weapons are also clearly defined. We will consider such a possibility as soon as we receive reliable information about a massive launch of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border, meaning strategic or tactical aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, hypersonic missiles and other aircraft.
Putin cited the dynamically changing military and political situation and the emergence of new sources of military threats as the reason for proposed radical expansion. Placing his faith in the country's nuclear arms, he said they were the most important guarantee of security of our state and its citizens. In response to Putin's remarks, Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said Russia, quote, no longer has anything other than nuclear blackmail to intimidate the world. In June this year, Putin had warned the European countries supporting Ukraine, claiming that Russia has many more tactical nuclear weapons than there are on the European continent. Even if the United States brings theirs over, Europe does not have a developed early warning system. In this sense, they are more or less defenseless. Could the proposed change in rules and preconditions of Russia be construed as a credible threat to use nuclear weapons in the war against non-nuclear Ukraine? Well, the change in Russia's nuclear doctrine has come at a time when Ukraine has pushed into Russian territory this year and wants to target bases inside Russia, which it claims are sending missiles into Ukraine. The Russian forces, on the other hand, have begun storming Vuhledar, a mining town and stronghold that has resisted Russian attack since the beginning of the 2022 war. Russia, which already controls most of the main roads running into the town, has intensified its push on Vuhledar. The Russian forces find themselves on the cusp of succeeding, but just reaching the outskirts of Vuhledar has cost the Russian armed forces around 1,000 vehicles and potentially several thousand troops.
The Myanmar military deposed the democratically elected civilian government of the controversial Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi in February 2021. The coup triggered a wave of protests that transformed into a nationwide armed rebellion against the junta. Since the 27th of October last year, an alliance of three Myanmar ethnic minority groups, the Tang National Liberation Army, the Arakan Army and the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, collectively known as the Brotherhood Alliance, has launched coordinated attacks on the Myanmar junta. The Myanmar military, once considered the most powerful army in Southeast Asia, has suffered repeated blows at the hands of the resistance fighters and ethnic minority rebels. Last month, in its biggest defeat for the military in decades, the strategic city of Lashio fell to the MNDAA, an ethnic minority armed group linked to China. The Myanmar military has continued to pound the town with airstrikes, leading to scores of civilians getting killed and wounded. On Thursday, after 3.5 years of conflict, the Myanmar junta, interestingly, invited the armed groups opposed to its rule to stop fighting and to start talks to bring peace to the embattled Southeast Asian nation. Our next report gets you more details.
The town of Lashio, home to around 150,000 people, is the largest urban center to fall to any of Myanmar's myriad ethnic minority armed groups, who have waged a war against the military over autonomy and control of lucrative resources for decades. This is military's biggest defeat since they seized power for the first time in 1962. Though the fighting has relatively eased since town fell to rebels last month, junta planes are still flying sorties and conducting airstrikes.
There were junta airstrikes in the town in recent days. I heard there were damages and casualties. I personally don't think fighting will break out again, but I'm worried about the danger of airstrikes.
A majority of the residents of the embattled town fled during the weeks of fighting that culminated in the city's capture last month. Some of them, for lack of a better option, have returned after the MDNAA took over, but remain fearful for a return to the bloody violence.
I wouldn't say everyone has returned to the town. Many people have come back, but I think only about 20 to 30%. I hope this war will end soon. I don't want to flee to other towns when clashes break out. Fleeing requires money and we don't have enough money. My house in Lashio got damaged by artillery and we don't have anywhere else to go. So I came back to Lashio and I'm trying to stay here.
Analysts are of the opinion that the MDNAA will likely struggle to govern Lashio, which is close proximity to lucrative lead, silver, and zinc mines, and straddles a key trade route to China. Both sides have continued to launch rockets and shells at each other. Not only are the junta jets pounding the city, but they have targeted hospitals and administrative buildings as well, in a bid to prevent the MNDAA from advancing post-conflict reconstruction and returning the city to normal under its governance. Considering the MDNAA is now trying to govern a much larger territory beset with a wide range of challenges, will the relatively inexperienced ethnic minority armed group prove to be an able administrator? Only time will tell.
The Sudanese army launched its first major offensive in months to try and regain the capital city of Khartoum from the rival paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces. The renewed push by the army in the early hours of Thursday came ahead of an address by its commander and Sudan's de facto leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The civil war in Sudan, now in its 18th month, has killed at least about 20,000 people, though some estimates put the death toll to be over 150,000. An estimated 10 million people, about a fifth of Sudan's population, have been forced to flee from their homes, leading to arguably one of the world's largest displacement crises. Worsening the situation, a cholera epidemic is also raging through the country. Our next report gets you the details.
The Republic of the Sudan, Africa's third largest country by size, has been ravaged by war for the past 17 months. The conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, erupted on the 15th of April last year. The RSF, helmed by Mohammed Dagalo, and the army led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan had shared power with civilians after the 2019 overthrow of former strongman Omar al-Bashir. And in 2021, the army and the RSF joined hands together to stage a coup. But relations soured between the army and the RSF over the planned integration of the paramilitary RSF into the regular army, an internationally backed political transition plan. Since the fighting began in mid-April, it has displaced more than 10 million people, half of them children, left capital Khartoum in ruins, precipitated a humanitarian crisis, and triggered ethnically driven killings in Darfur. On Thursday, in its biggest operation to regain ground in capital Khartoum, Sudanese army shelled RSF bases in the capital Khartoum and Bahri to its north. Residents of the capital said the artillery and airstrikes started overnight and intensified at dawn. Reportedly, the army crossed 3 key bridges over River Nile, which had separated parts of the capital held by the army from those under RSF control. The RSF, in control of nearly all of the capital since early in the war, claimed to have repelled the attacks. The same day, in an address to the United Nations General Assembly, General Burhan said any peace efforts depended on the RSF laying down arms.
We will not allow a ceasefire without a withdrawal, and we refuse any ceasefire, whether it be in El Fasher or Khartoum or in any other place. These forces have to withdraw from the homes of our citizens, from the roads, and from the areas that they have occupied. Any ceasefire without a withdrawal would have no value and no meaning, because our citizens will not return if these forces remain.
Accusing the RSF of committing countless crimes and obstructing peace efforts, Burhan called for the rebel militia to be designated as a terrorist group. The army chief also accused countries in the region of providing the RSF with financial support, mercenaries, and political cover.
Countless crimes have been committed: ethnic cleansing, forced displacement, and genocide. All of this has been committed by the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, which should be considered a terrorist group. This militia is continuing to perpetrate crimes, and it is most unfortunate that it is receiving the support of some countries in the region, countries which are providing funding and mercenaries for their own political and economic benefit, in flagrant violation of law and international will.
Though Burhan refrained from naming any country, his government has repeatedly accused the United Arab Emirates of fomenting conflict in the country by funneling arms to the paramilitaries from neighboring Chad, in violation of the UN arms embargo. US-led diplomatic efforts to broker peace have so far faltered, with the Sudanese army refusing to attend talks last month in Switzerland. In a recorded speech released to the UN General Assembly just after Burhan spoke, RSF leader Mohammed Dagalo repeated previous pledges of being open to the idea of a nationwide ceasefire that would allow delivery of aid. According to the United Nations, the 17-month-long civil war in Sudan risks triggering the world's largest hunger crisis. About 25 million people, approximately half of the country's population, are in need of all types of humanitarian assistance. Whereas more than 18 million people are grappling with food insecurity in the agriculturally rich nation. The big question is, how long will the people of Sudan, who have already endured 17 months of hell, continue to suffer?
And with that is a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.